and welcome to another episode of the Tell Nut Show. As always, we are your hosts. We have the lovely Kirsha Fox, author of newly released Son of Deception, homeschooling mama for, and avid gamer.
And my co-host is Julia J.K. Allen. She's an editor, author, and author coach. She is a fantasy and horror author who loves to put magic in everything. Thank you so much for watching with us today.
Yeah. We are super excited to welcome our guest, Terry Ervin. He is Terry W. Ervin II. Enjoys writing fantasy and science fiction. He enjoys spending time with his family and teaching English, and serves as a village councilman. And he can often be found in his basement raising turtles. So welcome to the show, Terry. So good to have you.
Hey, thank you for inviting me.
Of course, yeah. So tell us a little bit about how you got started as a writer and your writing journey. What does that look like for you?
Well, back when I was in college, I told myself someday I'd write a novel. And well, about 15 years later, I said, time's kind of passing. I better get on that. So I decided, just to start writing. And what I did was I'd done quite a bit of reading. So I picked up a couple of authors and I just started reading and studying and seeing how they did things, how they set up scenes, how they did dialogue, and how they moved the action forward. And this was probably around 1998, 99 or so, like that. So there wasn't as much access to information on the internet.
Right.
Right. I believe you both remember that.
I know. I remember when the internet came on a CD that you put in your computer, and then it had all those horrible noises it would make. And if your parents needed the phone.
Yeah, you could use the extra ones as a coaster for your cup of coffee, right? The ones
right. Right. And if your parents needed the phone, they kicked you off because it was through the phone line and all of that stuff. I think the transition from reader to writer is something that we've been noticing on a lot of people's journeys. So I have a question kind of off topic, but do you find yourself reading differently than the genre that you write, or do you find that they're pretty much the same?
Reading differently? You mean different genres than other than what I write? Oh yeah, I'll read almost everything except romance. I'll read fantasy and science fiction, of course, and but I'll read mysteries on occasion. I read a lot of nonfiction because I think that helps to generate ideas and just keeps me in touch with what's going on. I'll read some action adventure and techno thrillers on occasion. I do a lot of listening to audiobooks, really, that in the past 5 or 10 years. I teach English. I used to teach science and now I teach English. And I do an awful lot of reading during the school year. And so I'm reading papers, reading essays, reading and writing my own books. So I find that listening to books, when I'm driving or doing mundane tasks, that's pretty helpful to me.
Yes, I can relate. As an editor, I sometimes find my brain just doesn't have the power to read for fun as much. So audiobooks is a really nice way of still
your eyes get fatigued as well. Like it uses a different part of your brain for sure.
That is nice. How long have you been teaching?
I started teaching in Toledo in 1987. And then I was there for a couple of years. I subbed, and then I was there. And then the high school I was teaching at, they closed 3 high schools. And so I decided I don't want to go the sub route again because I'd have, my building was closed. And so I moved down to Piqua, where I got a job at Upper Valley Career Center. And I've been teaching there ever since.
Oh, well, you're doing the Lord's work. I know it's not easy to be a teacher, but they're so important and vital to our society.
It's not for everybody, but I do okay at it. And actually, I am here in my classroom. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, I love that. So you mentioned that you read science fiction and fantasy because you write that, but you also write lit RPG. Is that correct?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about that genre and why you chose it.
Well, lit RPG, it's kind of a broad area, but it kind of combines literary works with role-playing games, and they can be online games or tabletop games. Can be fantasy, science fiction, some horror, but not quite as much. And so it's kind of a marriage of those combined together.
Okay.
They have elements of the games in them, and some are really what you'd call crunchy or harder, where there's a lot of numbers and things like that that are, you see generated in video games and tabletop games. Or there's a little bit softer where the numbers aren't as prevalent or prominent. They're in there and they affect what happens, but it's not it's just a little bit of a different style. And some readers really enjoy the numbers and the number crunching and watching the progression, and others lean more towards liking the story but still the gaming aspect to it.
All right. And are you a tabletop gamer yourself?
Yeah, I've done it for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I've played all kinds of games, from Dungeons and Dragons and Top Secret and Rollmaster and diplomacy, some other types of games. So yeah, I've been doing it quite a while. Starfleet battles. I could probably go on Morrow Project for a long time.
I'm sure you could. All right. So can you tell us a little bit about your writing process then? How do you begin a new manuscript, and what does that look like for you?
Well, usually I've been thinking about it a while. Some kind of element. A lot of times it's some events or something comes together. And so I'll put that down in a file. And it used to be, I put it on note cards, but now I just put them on electronic files. And I'll let it percolate a while. And then I'll give you an example. My first book, Flank Hawk, it wasn't my first book published, or it was my first book published, not the first one I wrote, but that I was reading a couple of different books at one time. I was reading Harry Turtledove's The World War series, and that's where it's an alternate history where during World War II, Earth is invaded by some aliens, lizard-like aliens. And then I was also reading one of my favorite books, Roger Zelazny's in his Chronicles of Amber, and I was reading The Guns of Avalon, and that's where the Prince Corm figures out how to bring gunpowder to the kingdom of, the city of Amber, and where it wouldn't function before. And so I put those kind of two elements together. I was thinking about different things in World War II and different things in fantasy, and then I wondered what would happen if a dragon encountered like a World War II aircraft, like a Stuka or something like that.
Oh,
and so I said, that's pretty cool. I haven't seen that before. So I just kind of filed that away. And then what I did was I created a world where that could take place. And then I created kind of the conflict and what was going on. And then I created the characters to tell the story.
Right. I imagine that reading and learning about history oftentimes will help you in writing like fight scenes and battles. So what do you think is vital to know about writing fight scenes and battles?
Well, first you need to know your audience and what their expectations are. But it's kind of handy to know a little bit about the weapons and weaponry that's used, a little bit about the tactics, and kind of go from there. And, you have to do some research. You can talk to people. There's online videos and YouTubes. Like for the First Civilization's Legacy series, I used to do Civil War reenactment. And so I knew, quite a bit about some of their tactics and the weapons and how they function, their capabilities and things. And then, you go online or you read about swords and things. And so you just kind of get a little bit of background. You can't be an expert in everything, but you want to be well enough that you can write a good story, and then you can ask people that are in the know, how close this is, what did I mess up? Like for my post-apocalyptic alien invasion novel, Thunderwells, I have a friend who was in the military, and he was in artillery units. And so there was some of that was involved. And I had done a lot of reading and research, but I wrote it. And then I said, hey, what do you think of these sections here? What did I do right? What did I do wrong? What do I need to fix? And I do that. And then to write a good combat scene, you want to know what perspective you're telling the story from, what character's perspective. And that's really important, because what they know isn't always the whole scene. Like if you tell it in first person or third person, if you can jump around from one place to the other. But I think you want to get that, whoever perspective it's from, you want to get their feelings, their thoughts, their emotions in there. And it's not just it's more than actions. It's touch and smell, not just what they see.
Right. Imagery is including all five senses, especially in something as dramatic as a fight scene or a battle. You're going to have all the smells of, the chaos that's going around it and everything like that.
Yeah. And I've written a lot of like medieval battles and combat. And then I had medieval combat with wizards and panzers or tanks and things like that, and where chemical warfare came in, and so it's kind of, that was kind of interesting to mix up. And then I've written my one of my science fiction series, the Cracks War Chronicles, and that's kind of space opera action adventure, and so that has to do, there's some advanced combat on planets, and then there's also space combat and things like that. And so for the space combat, I studied naval combat, on Earth, and the formations and movements and maneuvers and tactics. And then I had to try and convert it to not two-dimensional, although with subs it's a little bit different, but out in space you can come in from, it's all level on Earth, but in space you can be coming from different directions and things like that. So then I had to kind of figure out, well, how is that going to work, and tried to work that through that. And I think it worked out pretty well. Most of the people who've read it have really enjoyed it, so I guess I did something right.
Oh, I'm sure you did. It sounds fascinating, this kind of juxtaposition between like our artillery and our real world technology, and then throwing in dragons and wizards. I really love that idea.
Dragons or wizards or aliens. Yes.
Yeah.
What do you do in a non-gravity field where you can't really use words like up or down, or, there's only you above, below, behind,
Yeah.
Trickier language, I'm sure.
Yes.
All right. So you were talking a little bit about battles and fights being different. So how would you explain the differences and how you should approach them differently?
Well, first, like I had said before, you want to determine your prospective character and what part he's playing, or she, and who's around them. And one of the things I think about, if you're going to build into a battle, a big battle, you want to build up to it a little bit before. So if there's a firearm, or there's a weapon, or there's a small tactic that the character uses, you want to have that introduced beforehand, so that when it comes to the big combat, you're not explaining, and the characters are familiar with it. In like the Cracks War Chronicles, the main character, he's a security specialist, and he's actually a relic, which means he uses like 1990s technology set in the future, which is kind of odd. There's a whole story behind that. So he uses a shotgun. He figures they're good enough for penal colonies, it should work for me. And he uses a revolver. And so the reader is all familiar with that, but they're also familiar with some of the other weapons, like there's heavy duty and light duty lasers and other guns like that. So when it all comes together, you can tell the story quickly. And so when he draws his revolver, you kind of know what's going on. When like the cracks are using their acidic rounds and he's in the trench line and they're eating the soil away, you already know what that is as a reader, and so it doesn't have to be explained to you. Some of the energy shields that some of the higher tech races use, you're already familiar with it. You know that some are directional all the way around, some are only one direction, and so you don't have to explain all of that to the reader. They're already knowledgeable about it. And then you want to know ahead of time. You want to have the stakes. What's at risk? Why is it happening? Not just, well, I think it's got kind of slow in the book, so maybe I need a battle to come up. Yeah, let's do that. It's building to something, and it's got to have meaning, and it's got to have some kind of stake for the main characters. Otherwise, if there's nothing at stake, if their lives can be at stake, but if there's something bigger is at stake and that they're fighting for, I think that makes a difference for the readers, and it engages them a little bit better, and it gives them a better story, because really that's what it's about. It's engaging the reader and entertaining them. And I mean, that's why they're reading your books, to be entertained, maybe to learn a little bit something, but for me, mostly I write to entertain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love that you talk about explaining things beforehand, because it's kind of like you want the readers to just be able to enjoy the dance, right? And not focus on the choreography, right? You want them to just be able to enjoy the storytelling, the battle, the fights, the excitement, the danger, and the stakes, like you say, without getting into the technicalities in that moment, because slow fight scenes can happen and they can work, like we see in The Princess Bride with the little duel they do, and they've got the back and forth banter. But a lot of times we want to keep things more fast paced and just like going with the flow and stuff. So that's a great tip. Yeah.
It's a really good idea to start with something that your reader is already going to understand and then build on that. So I liked that, what you said as well.
Exactly. And one of the best ways, people ask, well, how do you know how to write those? And, because very few people that I have ever heard of have ever fought a dragon, ridden a dragon, or, had actual sword fights to the death, things like that. Right. So one of the things that I do, and to get the pacing and the description, I find other writers that I enjoy reading and that I think are very talented. And then I will watch and see how they do things and how they pace it, how they put dialogue in, how they use perspective, how they use the different senses, and how they pace it out. And if it's told from third person limited, where they can jump from one person to the other, and when they do it and why, and just apply what you learn from them to your writing talent, your writing skills, and your style, and to your story. So, you kind of learn from the people who have already been published and who you think are good, and you can learn quite a bit that way on how to tell those tales, because that is really a common question that early writers have. Well, how do you write a fight scene? How do you write
right.
And there's really no easy answer, because there's so many different types of battle. There's so many different types of personality of just characters, how bold they are, or how well trained they are, or how timid they are. Whether it's individual, whether it's group, small group, large scale. And so you can learn a lot from what other people have done, and again, just modify it to your purposes and your needs and your skill level. Because there's, people will say, well, use short sentences, and that's good, but that's not enough. Right. There's just so much more.
Oh, absolutely. And you also don't want to have it be too different from the rest of your writing voice and style throughout the rest of the book either. Yeah. So where you're suddenly going to chunky sentences and it's choppy, and if it doesn't match the rest of the story, that doesn't work as well. Do you have an author that you feel like does fights and battles really well, like someone that you have looked at and kind of looked up to?
Well, I did like Roger Zelazny. I took a look at some of his works, and Stephen Bruce. He was, especially for the smaller scale individual. Um, then like John Ringo for some of the military. Even like Tom Clancy, he was really good at some of that, and Harry Turtledove, uh, especially for the science fiction combat. Those are probably I did Laurel K. Hamilton. She did some good action. I did that for some of her Anita Blake books. I like the earlier ones, and then she got off
Mm-hmm.
more into romance than action adventure. But she was really a good one too for some ideas. And so I kind of looked a whole bunch of places to find what I would need or what I could use. So there was a whole host of just I don't know if you can find it all with just one, or I couldn't. Maybe
Right.
somebody else could.
Yeah, no, I love that. I approach cooking kind of the same way where I look up at different recipes and kind of think about the methodology behind each one and then cobble together kind of my own style of doing it. So, yeah, I love that. Yeah.
I have a lot of books with little bookmarks in them.
Yeah. Oh, I bet. Yeah,
You
little
would go
tabs.
to the different scenes and things like that.
Right,
Well,
right.
that's how we learn. That's how we as humans learn from each other. We watch, we observe, and then we take it and put our own spin on it.
Right,
Exactly.
right. And it's a lot easier to learn hands-on, so kind of like in the moment reading and then cobbling it together in your writing. Yeah.
And just know that first time you write it down, it's going to be crap, and you're going to find and fix it, and don't
Right.
get discouraged.
Right, right. It's hardly ever perfect on the first try. Otherwise, yeah. Who would write? Everyone could write a perfect novel if it was that easy, right? So
If you think you've gotten it right the first time, you really don't.
You are so
Right.
correct. Come back to it a week later and reread it, and you're going to be like, oh, yeah, whatever. That was sort of good, maybe.
Right. That was
I have
interesting.
been
Nice
humbled
to
by my editor many times.
know. Oh, yeah.
Awesome. All right. So what are some things that we should avoid as writers when we're writing action scenes?
You want to avoid, I saw, then I did this, then I did that, the litany of sequence of actions. You want to avoid that. You can, in the first draft of it, you can write that and get all that out, and then you can start restructuring the sentences and taking the actions. You don't have to say I saw, you just have to say, so and so ran in front of me, or I ducked because, those kind of things. So that's the first thing.
It's a bit more passive voice, I believe.
Yeah. The passive isn't good. There's good places for it, but too much is I think a really bad thing, especially in an action scene, unless you're having, and there's times for it, for if you've got a really passive character, somebody who's cowering or who doesn't know what to do and is kind of confused and is backing away, then passive probably is a good choice.
Well, that's a good insight.
Right. I agree because there's that one movie where I want to say it's the Saving Private Ryan or something, where we have the one character who's cowardly and cowering, like you said, and he's afraid, and so things are just happening to him, and that would be a good point to implement something like
that's a good example where he's responding to what's going on, whereas as opposed to taking action to make things happen.
Right. Oh my gosh, that scene really got me too when I watched that movie because I was just like,
that is a very good movie.
Yeah, it is. It is a very good movie. So, what is your favorite part of writing?
Actually, editing and revising and making it tighter and better. I really dread writing those first drafts. It's really hard for me to get it all done and get it through.
Mhm. Right.
So I, I think the editing, revisioning, tightening it up, improving the dialogue, improving the descriptions and the action, cutting stuff away that you don't need, adding in stuff that you were too sparse somewhere and you needed
Right.
to add that in. That's what I enjoy the most.
I love that answer as an editor. Usually people are like, oh, the editing is the part that I dislike the most. But there is something very satisfying about taking kind of like the raw material and finding the gems inside. Yeah, for
Mhm.
sure.
Yeah, but
That can be
well, and I'm an English teacher, so that makes a little bit of difference. But
right.
and I don't, there's very few absolutes in writing. If anybody tells you that
Mm-hmm.
there's only one way to do something, I think they're full of crap, and I think you
Right.
ladies probably believe that too. But this is something I do believe is almost everybody needs an editor. I mean, I'm an English teacher. You think I could do pretty good, but I need an editor because I
Mm-hmm.
have blind spots. And
Mhm.
we all have blind spots in our reading or in our writing when we're reading it back, and for a whole host of reasons. And that would be a whole podcast you could talk about. I mean,
Yeah.
I've done presentations on it for other writers about self-editing and
Mm-hmm.
stuff, and just trying to get it done. And I know in a previous podcast, I don't remember who had said it, but one of the things is to change the font because it resets
Mm-hmm.
it for your mind. But still, I think you still need an editor.
Mm-hmm.
Even an outside reader could help too on occasion, because you can get that tunnel vision that you just don't
Right.
recognize.
Yes, you absolutely need the
Right.
fresh eyes on it because you, as the writer, you're there in your head. You can see it. So you might not realize that you didn't actually say it.
Right. Right. I've seen that in some people where they have so much going on in their imagination, but on the page it's just missing a few colors, we'll say, out of the
Mhm.
palette. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's really nice to get another pair of eyes on it for sure.
Mhm. All right. What is your least favorite part of writing then? You mentioned you don't like that first draft, but
Yeah, that's probably right. Trying to get that first draft done is that's the hardest part for me.
Mhm.
And part of it, I think, is because I'm so busy. I get more of my writing done during the summer, but I teach, and that takes quite a bit of time.
Mhm.
And then you have a family, and I have church, and then I serve as a village councilman, and I'm also a trustee on the fire board, and I'm just always doing a lot of things. And so I think for me, it's easier to sit down and edit a few pieces than it is to sit down and write, um, and just get something written and all the way out. Um, One of the things that I do is to try and help with that consistency, because I don't get to write every day, obviously. What I'll do is I'll reread the section I did before to get back in the story, and I'll edit it as I go. And then I'll write new material. Then the next time I sit
Mm.
down, I'll rewrite what I did the last time, and then I will add more words to it. And
Oh,
that's one of the processes that I go through. And then one of the other things that I do to save time for myself, if I'm writing a series, very often I will write the first chapter or two in the next book if I know where it's going. And it's just a
mm.
rough draft, it's just hashed out. But you would be surprised that if you go away from a project for a while and you write something else, trying to get back into the story, get back into the character's head, get back into the voice
Right.
is challenging. And to stare at a blank screen can be challenging for some people too. And it is a little bit for me. So it's kind of nice to have something there in front of you already started, because you've got that momentum going when you finish the last book and you're still in that character voice. You kind of know what's going on. So it's easy to bleed over, and it
Right.
just gives you a running start when you come back the next time.
That's a fabulous tip. I know I've heard people say that they kind of stop in the middle of a thought so that they know where to pick up for next time. But it is really important because even if you don't stop in the middle of a thought, because I would never remember what I was saying if I stopped in the middle. But like, it's nice to be, like you said, in that mindset where you're like, okay, I'm in the same place, so let me write the next couple of the next book so that you can kind of resettle into that position you were in when you stopped the first one.
Yeah, and you ladies, I know you've written different characters, and so when you're in one character's head to another, and so the different protagonists that I have, the main characters, are completely different personalities. And so, you know, in Relic Tech, Craw, the security specialist, he's kind of got a chip on his shoulder and he doesn't get along with a lot of people. Whereas Krish in the First Civilization's Legacy, he's kind of forward and heroic, tries to be, and stuff like that, but he tries to get along. And then Jack in one of my other series, or it's not a series of standalone, he's more of a pragmatist and he's kind of laid back. And you know, so each of them are different. And so it's hard. You want to get into their head and you want to be consistent, because the reader's going to notice that, and they're going to notice it from book to book, because yeah, you haven't been there in a while, but they may pick up your series and they'll go from book 1 to book 2 to book 3, and they're going to notice that difference.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. I also find that when you're writing a series, like book 1 seems to kind of just fly out of you. Book 2 seems a little harder to tackle. Did you find that to be the case for you as well in series?
Yeah, it can be. One of the things that I do is I keep a list of characters, descriptions, places, and things like that, bits of dialogue, so that I'm consistent with the character from book to book. It's easier with the main character, but you know, with secondary characters and things like that, I want to be consistent. It helps with the descriptions, and it helps with traveling around. In my Lit RPG series, you know, there's a lot of like NPC characters, and some of the readers really like them, and you want to be very consistent with them. You know, they have maybe a way they talk, or you know, you want, if the way to like the barber shop was one way and it was so far from the pawn shop, you want to keep that the same as it was before. And so, you know, you think, and maybe as a beginning writer will think, well, I'll never forget that stuff. You know, I'll always remember because it's in my head. And you might, if that's all you write and you don't write anything else and you're able to go back to it. But as that series gets longer, you've made choices and you have to stick with those choices. And so, you know, when you come up with something, it's kind of important. Like if you're building a world and you're having a certain type of magic and you're setting up the rules, you know, make sure you set those rules up, because they've got to continue all the way through the series. Writing a one-off book is easier because of that, but I think that having that organization, and my files are not all that organized. It's just a document with, like, I have the name, I have it split up to places and characters and other information, and then I'll have the character's name, and I will take out even descriptions straight out of the book, and then I'll paste them there, and just so I have it to reference and to go back to.
Oh, that's a really good idea. I know some people call them series Bibles or compendiums, but like keeping track of everything, especially because sometimes you'll be like, was that book 2 or book 3? And like, you know, it gets all kind of mixed up in your head, or you forget little details. And I've read books where I'm like, chapter 2, this character has black hair, and by chapter 8, they suddenly have red hair, because, you know, you just forget details, and then you make a decision, and it turns out you made 2 decisions on that character.
Is their name spelled with a Y or an I? You know,
Absolutely.
And readers, they do notice that, some of them. They'll notice that. And it was kind of funny. In one of my books, one of the things about the magic system is that it alters you. as you cast the magic. So if you are an enchanter, you become more susceptible to spells affecting you. So in a way, you become more defenseless. And as a healer, the more powerful a healer you are, the less you're able to do physical damage and combat somebody else.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and so if you're like an air wizard, your hair turns white and your skin turns white and your eyes, kind of pale out. And one of the characters, she started with pretty white eyes, but later on her eyes are a different color. And some of the people picked up on that, but then, and I guess I'm giving a little bit away. It's just something minor, but she started coloring her hair instead of allowing it to go translucent, and just kept it white because she didn't necessarily want people to know how powerful she was. And
Oh,
so there's
I
little
like
things like
that.
that.
Yeah.
And so readers too will appreciate just little things like that, little clues that you can lay along, but that's how much they pay attention. Some of the readers,
Right.
they are just, some of them are just they just remember things. But
Right,
again, some
right.
of them are just reading your series from beginning to end, where it took you a year to write the book, and then maybe had a year of something else, and then it took you another year to write. So you're 3 or 4 years into it.
Right. And they read it in a couple of hours
Yeah.
overnight in the middle of the night. Right.
Mhm.
No, I love that. I love that for two reasons. Because one, you're putting some limitations. So you have magic and you can use magic, but it changes you. It either makes you more susceptible or makes you weaker in offensive magic. I love that concept because like I said, you're taking something and adding stakes to it, like
Yeah.
the thing itself, which I love. Yeah.
Yep. And like a sorcerer, their body becomes, more crippled,
Right.
and a necromancer, it's just not pretty. I mean,
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah.
Mhm.
So you've been giving us lots of great advice tonight, but do you have writing advice that you really like and would like love to share with a baby author?
don't compare your first draft with other writers and what you see out there, because I think a lot of writers, they start out and they're disappointed because they look at what they wrote, and then they look at like their favorite authors and they like, my stuff is utter crap, it's not even
Mhm.
close.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, it's your first draft, and yeah, you're learning, and yeah, it's your um, you haven't gone through it and revised it. And what I found is that with many writers, when they start writing a book, by the time they get to the end of the novel, they are a much better writer from beginning to end. Part of it
Right.
is they develop the skill. Part of it, they get to know the characters and the world better, whatever situation that they're writing. But and a novel is going to go through multiple edits and revisions, but very often they get discouraged by getting their first few chapters down and rereading it and like, oh, it's just not even close. Well, no, it's not close, and it's not supposed to be close.
Mm.
um, by the time you've gone through and revised, it's going to be better. And you may not be the greatest writer in the world, but you can certainly be competent and tell a good story. um,
Right.
Not everybody starts off to be a bestseller, and a lot of authors will tell you that they'll go back to their first book, which may have even been very successful, and say, there's a lot of things I would do different about it with what I know now compared to what I know
Right.
then. But you are where you're at right now. Everybody was a beginner at one time. Nobody started off as an experienced novelist. They started somewhere.
Mhm.
Absolutely. I love that
That's
too.
really good advice.
Yeah. It is. Yeah, because we can't all be, Zadie Smith writing out of college these amazing
Yeah.
books and stuff like that. We all have to
Mhm.
start at the
Well,
beginning like everyone else
you
did.
don't know how many revisions they went through, how many
Right.
rounds of edits they went through, like how much time they poured in. Sometimes authors will put something away and they'll work on it for 3 years, like you
Mhm. Mhm.
you don't know.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right. So what influences your writing? I know you get a lot of inspiration from other authors when it comes to fight scenes, but what about for the rest of your writing?
Well, I'll watch the History Channel. And my wife used to call it the War Channel. It used
Right.
to be a lot more World War II and everything like that. But I'll watch a lot of, just some documentaries and nature programs and things like that. And I will watch and read, I will not, I like read World War II
Mhm.
nonfiction. I will, I'll pick up different books. Sometimes somebody will recommend a book to me. Um, I'll read westerns like Larry McMurtry's Lonesome Dove is an excellent book, and just this tale he told with the variety of characters and and the setting and just the big expanse of the long story as it went through. I mean, they made a mini series out of Lonesome Dove, and that's with Robert Duvall and it was Tommy Lee Jones, and it was an
Oh,
excellent
okay.
mini series, and I'd recommend it. But the book is really good too, and there's so much in the, even though it's a mini series and it's like 6 or 7 hours long, you can't fit all of what's in a novel
Right.
inside even that time span. And so, just reading elsewhere and watching television, watching movies, and just kind of paying attention to, well, a lot of times when I'll read somebody else's book, I'll read it first for enjoyment, and then I'll dissect it and read it and say, because I'll kind of remember, well, I really like this character, or I thought that, how this character turned or changed or whatever. And then I'll go back and I'll reread and I'll pay attention to those elements or items, and I might even jot notes down about it or put a bookmark in or something like that. And it is hard sometimes as an author to read for enjoyment, because your mind starts to go to that storytelling or that
Mhm.
editing or something like that. And that's why I like audiobooks too, because it's a different venue of listening as opposed to reading, but it still
Right.
activates the similar parts in the brain, and it's still a story. And then you can always go back to the book itself and find that same chapter, that same section, and you can see how it was done with the writing as well.
Right, right. That kind of allows you another way to just enjoy the story when you're listening
Mhm.
to it.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
most of my books have been made into audiobooks. And I'll tell you what, it's really cool having somebody read your book to you.
Oh,
It
yeah,
is
that is
it
cool,
is
yeah.
really, and they'll take their own a little bit of spin on the characters. And it's funny
Right.
because now sometimes when I'm writing the characters, I'm hearing their voice
Mhm.
from the
Oh,
audiobook
yeah.
narration.
Oh, that's wonderful, yeah, so it kind of inspires you in a way, their interpretation of your
Yep,
characters.
yep. And it helps me
Yeah.
keep consistent, I think, too.
Right, right. Oh, that's wonderful, yeah.
Yeah, uh, James Waters, he I mean, I've had some good narrators uh, that have worked, but they um they just do a good job, and I
Mhm.
think that if you get a good narrator, um, Jonathan Waters, I'm sorry, it's not
All
James,
right.
it's Jonathan. I knew I am really horrible with names. It's really funny because
Right.
I'm a teacher. I'm sorry, Jonathan. He's narrated several like the Lit RPG series. He does
Oh,
that,
yeah.
and he did Thunderwells for me, and he's just really creative and really good. And it's hard to get, I think, sometimes a male narrator that has a slight range in female character
Mhm.
voices, and
Mhm.
he does that really well too.
Oh, that's wonderful, yeah. Um, what do you think of writer's block, and do you think, like, how would you overcome it?
I don't. This is kind of bad to say, but I don't really get writer's block.
Mhm.
Um, I'm more pressed for time. And so when I've got the time, I've got to write. And what helps me, and this is just me, it doesn't work for everybody, but I kind of outline my stories. I don't do like pages and pages, but I'll know the beginning and the end, and then some major scenes and events that happen throughout the story. And so
Mhm.
it's kind of like a vacation where you mark out your road trip, where you're going to go and what you're going to
Right.
do, and where you're going to stop. And so I've got those mile markers and places to write to. So I kind of know where I left off and where I've got to get to next. And I think that helps me avoid the writer's block. But if I'm kind of stuck on a scene and I don't really know, I know what I want to write, but it's just not coming out right. I'll go back and I'll edit and I'll make good use of time. And then I'll come back to it, the next day or the next week when I'm able to. So I haven't had to deal with writer's block. I have to deal with lack of time.
Right, right. And that's one reason why I like to know where I'm going when I sit down. I set goals for myself and I'll say like, okay, I'm going to develop this relationship between these characters or insert this plot device or whatever you need to do, foreshadowing, etc. Just because like you said, sometimes the blank page can just be intimidating, but if you know where you're going, then it kind of, you sit down with purpose and intention and you can kind of make sure you're using good use of your time. Yeah, for sure.
All right. What would you consider to be your most significant writing victory so far?
I think, that's almost like asking what's your favorite book. And that's hard to do because, I think Relic Tech is probably my most, the plot is the most complex plot. I think that probably some of my best writing was done in Soul Forge. I think that with Thunder Wells was a project that I just really wanted to do, and it was in the back of my head. And usually standalones don't sell as well as a series, but my publisher, I've done pretty well, and so he's like, go for it. And so I wrote it, and it doesn't sell as well because, I mean, it sells good and it's earned out. It's one of the things that I stay concerned with is with the publishers is they put an investment in, they pay for cover art, they pay for some marketing, they pay for editing, and they pay for the ISBNs and stuff. And it's important that the books sell enough that they at least make back their investment. And so, it's done that. But one of the things when you write a series is when this next book comes out, your first book sells again, and then your second book and third. So every time you put another book out, it kind of reinvigorates the back log, or the back catalog of what's there. And so that gives it the opportunity for the series to do much better. And really, I think a lot of readers who get invested in a world and characters, they like a series.
Absolutely.
So I kind of got off track there. And I think people that probably have the most fun and the most lighthearted and are probably the easiest for me to write are the lit RPG books, because if you've done role playing and tabletop role playing games and stuff, it's kind of like writing an adventure. And so if you've done that for years, it's a lot easier to do. And so those are fun and easy. There's something about each of them. I have a short story collection, and some of the short stories are just really kind of neat little snippets of things. I have a short story that a person has his body cryogenically frozen because he's got like Lou Gehrig's disease, and so then his soul is trapped in the body, and he can see heaven, and it's called Tethered in Purgatory. But since he's tethered to his body that's in cryogenic freezing, he can't leave.
Oh, okay.
And it's not really enough for a complete novel.
Right.
There's another one I wrote, Accelerated Justice, where it's set in kind of the near future, where instead of criminals doing sentences in time, they inject a person and it degrades their DNA. So if they get a 10-year sentence, within a matter of months, they age 10 years. So they don't do time in prison. They just take away that time from their life. And it's about a limousine driver who gets wrongfully accused, gets caught up in the amoral justice system and how it affects him, and just, so there's a lot of message and a lot of, there, but again, it's not a complete novel's worth of tale.
Yeah. So I know you said it was just as bad as asking, so we have to ask, of course, what is your favorite book or author and why?
My favorite book, surprisingly, is, I don't know if you've ever read it or whatever, but my favorite book is The 5 People You Meet in Heaven by Mitch Albom.
Oh, yeah, I have read that. Yeah.
And it's one that actually I do with my students, my senior students. We usually read at the end of the year, and I get about 95% buy-in that really enjoy it, because for that novel, for that book, for that tale, I mean, it speaks to just about everybody. I think the 5 lessons that he learns, about how everybody's connected and what you do impacts others, and about sacrifice being something to aspire to, and that hate and forgiveness and the need to forgive, and that lost love is still love, and that no life is a waste is really important. See, my students that I teach at a career tech center, and a lot of them are going to be welders, they're going to be mechanics, they're going to be cosmetologists, they're going to be, they're going to be the guy that, or the girl that comes in and fixes your furnace when it's 5 degrees outside and it's busted, and sometimes that's a thankless job. It's a hard job, being a roofer or just all the different things they do in robotics or a machinist. And so a lot of them can identify with Eddie, the main character, who's a maintenance man. But a lot of them can identify with him because it reminds them of their grandfather, or they've lost somebody like him, or they can identify that things that happened in his life, and I think a lot of readers can too. And it's just a good book. It's a good, wholesome book. It's got good messages. It speaks a lot to a lot of people, and it's short. It's not really long, and it's not preachy. And you can just, what you come away with, you come away with. I know that there have been kids when they've gone through some of the scenes, they're even the toughest guy, you can see him a little bit tearing up sometimes.
Yeah.
Because it's something that happened to him.
Yeah. I don't, I read it quite a while ago, so it's not fresh in my memory, but I do remember crying. That's one thing I definitely remember about that book, but crying in a good way, because it was just impactful. And I think that's great, because it is imparting like these, valuable lessons, to your students as well.
And it's lessons, but it's something for them to think about. You can't, one of the things about reading is that you get to experience so many other aspects of life and people's lives. And whether you're writing a mystery or even a horror or a fantasy or literary fiction and things like that. And so people, the same scene, the same book, different readers will come away with something different. It'll have a different meaning to them, and they'll pull something away from it different. And I think that's important to realize, even as an author. There's a scene in like I said, in Accelerated Justice, where one of the nastier characters holds up a finger to the limousine driver, and some people will think he held up this finger, and some people will think he held up his middle finger to him. And it all depends on how the person reads and their experiences in their life, and things such as that. And that's why I think too, when you're creating characters, a mistake that a new author can make is trying to be too controlling. Trying to get that description down to the tiniest little bit. Give and the world and the situation. Give the reader enough to go on and let their imagination run with it.
Right.
If you write horror, you can't write something more scary to an individual than what their imagination can come up with. You
Right.
cannot write a fantastic, beautiful city, fantasy city. Your words can't do it as much as give them the pieces to go with and let it run with their imagination run with it.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. Leave a little wiggle room for the reader to
Mhm.
fill in. That's great advice.
All right. Is there any writing advice that you do not like that you hear commonly given?
Write every day.
Mm.
I
Yes.
can't do it, and I've done okay as an author. I'm not anywhere in the big leagues, and I don't
Right.
think I ever will be. I kind of look at it like the major leagues, the
Mhm.
Major League Baseball, like the Cincinnati Reds or the New York Yankees. And I consider myself more like the minor leagues, the
Right.
double A or triple A, still professional, but I'm not in the big leagues. And that's okay. Maybe if I had gone that way route and just wanted to be an author, but I have too many other things that I'm doing.
hmm
So, you know, I don't write every day. I just can't.
Right.
And maybe that's important for some people, but again, I don't like in writing absolutes
hmm
where you have to do it this way or you have to do it that way or you're not going to be successful, because if you listen to podcasts or you listen to interviews with the various very famous, very successful authors, their processes are very different.
Right.
So what Stephen King says, if he says something and I say something, you probably ought to listen to him, because just common sense. But the other thing is what Stephen King says you should do, and he's not one of those people. I've read some of what he said, and he's not one of those people who says this is the only ironclad way that it can be
Right.
done.
Mhm.
There are things that are probably a good idea and
Right.
probably helpful. I mean, just like we were talking about, you should probably have an editor. I'm sure
hmm
that there are some self-published books out there, or there are some traditionally published books out there that had a crappy editor, and they
hmm
still did very well.
Right. Right.
So there are no absolutes, but you can set yourself up to be successful by doing some of the right things. And
Right.
I think that's important. um, Maybe you can't write every day, but you need to make it a priority to write, because if you don't write, if it keeps getting bumped down, then it's never
Right.
going to get done. And if you never write, you're never going to finish a project. And if you never finish a project, you have no hope of being successful. Nobody's going to
Right.
read what you wrote.
Right. You definitely have to finish to get it published, so that there's I think probably a kernel of gold in every advice, right, that people
Mhm.
give. So you have to kind of dig for that sometimes. If the advice doesn't apply to us, what can we glean from that? So that I think
Mhm.
that's good.
It's kind of like
Good
the rule.
perspective.
There's rules,
Yeah.
but rules are meant to be broken. But maybe you ought
Yes.
to know
Yes.
the rule before you try and break it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. 100% agree. It's been
Mhm.
great talking to you, and we want to give you an opportunity to tell us where we can find you online. So I know you have a website, but if you want to let everyone know where you are on social media and where we can learn more about your book.
Okay. So you can find me at irvin-author.com. And that's my main website. And then you can find my blog from there. You can find there's a Facebook group, Flankers, that some of the readers of my books started. So it's kind of like a fan group. It's not huge, but I post stuff there. They post things there every now and then. I did stuff like a cover contest where they voted on which covers they thought were kind of had like a tournament where
Oh,
they thought
fun.
which
Yeah.
covers were best and things like that. Um, So those are the my Ervin-author.com is the place that you can find most about me. You can find events that I go to, and you know, presentations that I do at libraries and things like that. I try to do signings when I can. It's nice to be able to get back to doing signings and going out and doing stuff,
Right.
because that had kind of died for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been so lovely talking with you. We really want to thank you for joining us today on the show.
Well, I
Thank you
really
so much.
appreciate it, and thank you for inviting me. Those are really, I liked your questions. They're really good questions, and I just hope that I was able to give a little bit of insight or advice to your audience. And again,
Absolutely.
just because it's my advice doesn't mean it's right. See if it rings right to you. It's what works for me. Something will work for you, but I guess the last thing I'd like to say for the aspiring writers out there is there's a lot of writers who people, I guess, who think they can be writers but they never start. And there's a lot of people who start a book but never finish it.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a lot of people who write that first draft but never do what it takes to get that final draft out. And it just keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. But there are so many of those people at the beginning that just gave up that I think truly have talent and truly have the ability, but they just gave up too soon because it is hard and it does take a long time. And in truth, there is no guarantee of success at the end. And that can be kind of however you want to measure success.
Right.
There's no guarantee of it, but there is no chance of success if you don't do what's needed to at least get that novel done.
Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah. Very well said. And we want to thank you once again for joining us. And to our listeners at home, thanks for listening along. Join us next episode. I think the next episode is getting pretty close to the season end for season 1. So that's pretty exciting. So remember, there's more than one way up a mountain, and be sure to check us out on social media. If you're interested in being a guest, we are on social media at The Tell Not Show, or you can email us at thetellnotshow@gmail.com. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks again for listening. If you enjoyed the show, consider subscribing and liking. We appreciate all the support. Julia J.K. Allen is an author, editor, and coach, and can be found at hijinksswriter.com.
Kirsha Fox is an author, avid reader, gamer, and mother to 4, and you can find her at kirshafox.com. Thanks, and see you next time.